Everyone all set? Thanks everybody for coming here today. We have talked to you before about some of the different investigations we've been involved with in regards to things that came out of the Gacy reopening. And as many of you know, when we reopened that case, it was to try to identify the 8 unidentified individuals that were found in the crawl space there. When we have found one to date, but in the course of doing that, we've closed out 12 other cases as well. And that has come about exclusively because people have come forward after the announcement that we were going to work on this to submit DNA to be put into the database so that we could try to make some type of dent in all of the missing persons that are out there, unidentified individuals who have been killed, unidentified people who have died in the course of years. Today we are announcing that we have been able to close out another case as a result of that similar pattern where someone has come forward to have their DNA submitted with the thought that maybe their loved one had been a victim of John Wayne Gacy, but it turns out that he was not a victim of him, but had died nonetheless in another part of the country. The victim we're talking about today is Andy Drath. Andy was a young man who lived in the north side of the city of Chicago. He had till the age of 16, he lived in the area. He was a young man who, his sister is here today, who was the one who was instrumental in making this match, and she's going to talk about him. He lived with her for a while. After a period of time, his mother passed away when he was young. His stepfather, after a while, had him, he was made a ward of the state. And as a ward of the state, he went back and forth in the state before he wanted to have his custody transferred out to San Francisco. And that was the last he was heard from. This was 1978, 1979. Both his sister and another individual contacted us shortly after we made the announcement about the Gacy case that we were looking for people to come forward. Willa, his sister, supplied us with DNA. Shortly after we made the announcement back in 2011, I think it was, and we went about investigating it. Andy fit the age of many of the victims of John Gacy. He fit the general region where John Gacy was getting victims from, and Andy went missing during that period of time toward the end when John Gacy was killing a lot of people. So a lot of that fit the mold. We got the DNA from Willa. We put it into the system. The lab down in Texas, which has done amazing work with us throughout this investigation, they did the analysis, compared it to the remains from the crawl space, and there was no connection. There was no connection whatsoever. We then had the DNA put into the CODIS system nonetheless in the event that, like some of the other cases, there might be a different connection. After a period of time, the medical examiner's office in San Francisco put in a tissue sample of an individual who had been shot to death in San Francisco back in '79. They put the tissue sample in to be analyzed. It was analyzed in 2014. The DNA from that tissue sample was put into CODIS in 2014, and shortly, not too long ago, a couple months ago, that the hit occurred between Willa's DNA that she had provided and the individual from San Francisco. That individual had been shot to death and had been left buried in San Francisco back in '79. We did the work based on the very good work that was done by the San Francisco authorities back in '79 that showed that they had documented that the individual who had been found had a tattoo actually on his arm that said Andy on it. We had that, but with the DNA we had the match. And so that case, which had been unsolved since 1979, is now officially closed. San Francisco is working on it as we speak in trying to close out who was responsible for the death. There is no information on that right now because at that point they didn't even know who that was. So this is yet another one of the examples that we plead with people that if you have any missing loved one, please, please, please take advantage of the DNA technology that's out there now. Give the DNA to us or another local law enforcement agency to have put into the CODIS system. and you too might be able to have these questions answered. That's how this case has been closed out. It's how many of the other ones have been closed out. The initial spark was thinking that just maybe there was a connection with John Gacy. There wasn't, but nonetheless it ended up in bringing some closure to a family that has long sought this closure. So I was going to have Willa come forward. Willa was Andy's sister. Willa, do you want?
Thank you.
Oh, you're welcome.
Hi. My brother and Andy and I, we loved fishing. Then we'd tromp through the shore of a small lake, catching frogs and turtles. He climbed everything, and I don't think there was one pair of pants that boy didn't rip. The coolest thing was when he taught me to whistle with my fingers like the boys did. He didn't even need his fingers, he just curled his tongue, and I never could develop that level of mastery. We fought like siblings, but we always had our bond. Even after he left home, he'd call me or visit every month or two. Then when I was 13 or 14, that stopped. In 2011, Sheriff Dart reopened the John Wayne Gacy case, as there were still unidentified victims. And that seemed like a long shot, looking for a kid living on the fringe after 35 years. My brother had been missing since the late 70s, a runaway, and he had become an invisible life, living on the streets. And since he would have been a typical target for Gacy, I came to see Detective Moran and submitted my DNA. Although my DNA did not match the Gacy victims, I got a call recently that there was a John Doe found murdered in San Francisco from back in '79. So 36 years ago, the police diligently cared for this boy's remains, this young man who may have been regarded by some as a nobody or just a street kid. And because of that professionalism, there was a good amount of evidence that was stored. We missed out on so much. My sons will never know their Uncle Andy. I never got to know him as a man. I would have liked to have just had the ordinary, just life's ups and downs and Thanksgiving dinner. I'd like to think we'd have had each other's back in this world and been those two and just pals through it all. I have two main messages. One, to those whose loved ones have gone missing, even long ago, I stand here as a testament that you'd never lose hope for closure that you've longed for. Believe me, although I'm terribly sad, the knowing is so much better. No matter how invisible you think your relative may be, there's likely a good amount of information that can be found. If you think he may have been a Gacy victim or just long missing, please call Sheriff Dart and submit your DNA to the National Missing Persons Database. 2, there's been a lot of talk about which lives matter. These blue lives care for these invisible lives. They're not forgotten. Because of that, John Doe number 89 was treated with dignity and now will come home to his kid sister with his name, Andy. Thanks.
Any questions from anybody? Robbie?
Will it talk to us about getting that phone call? And now, 4 years after you gave your DNA, you got that phone call from the sheriff or from Jason?
It was odd beginning to hope for a positive identification because it's not that I hoped he was dead. I just had so many other things going through my mind of what he could be going through or what could have happened to him. It's certainty that he's not suffering anymore, that he can't be hurt anymore.
Is he, when you talk about your Uncle Andy to your kids, talk to us about what kind of a mythological figure he has been and what this does to that story?
Big brother. I told him about, we'd get up to all kinds of wonderful kid stuff, going out trick-or-treating the night before Halloween because we were told that's beggar's night, just all kinds of fun things that we'd do. His sense of mischief and his desire to be the funny one or his desire to be endearing. He would do just about anything if you dared him. But he was a kid,
What's it been like going 3 decades now without knowing?
just a huge unfinished line, just waiting to exhale, or worrying about what could have happened to him or his mind that he wouldn't have called me, because he always did. You know, I worried what could have happened to him to, you know, and the imaginings were worse. And it's so good to know he's at peace, he's coming home. And I don't know if people can feel or know anything after they die, but I hope he knows he's found.
Sheriff, I apologize, I actually have a question for you.
Sure.
So there are still 7 unidentified Gacy victims, right?
Yes.
So what are your hopes, since you've gone through a lot of the DNA already, what are your hopes that they'll be identified?
When we began this endeavor, we were hopeful but not naive. We did not, in our wildest dreams, think that we were going to have a quick resolution to the 8. We never really felt that we were going to get complete resolution. A lot of it has to do with the nature of the case. We did a lot of work on the front end, studying the case and re-examining it, went through the evidence rooms, went through stuff no one had looked at before, and in the course of that we found Gacy had traveled extensively through the United States that no one had really known as much about before. So the breadth of where his victims could come from all of a sudden started expanding, which by its nature then meant that we were probably going to have less and less of a chance to bring closure to the 8. And the nature of how Gacy went after people, he went after young men who were on the fringes of society by and large, and so a lot of them were people who had some connection one time or another with our child welfare system, which has its issues now. Can you imagine what it was like back in the 70s as far as tracking anything, keeping track of people that were bouncing from one placement to another and evaporating into the ether? And so I'm not trying to say that we aren't hopeful. We are hopeful we'll close out some more cases, and the only way it will be following what Willa was talking about, people coming forward, even if they aren't thinking that there's a connection there, but that will be the break, because that's what we have found. It breaks these cases. But the very nature of this was always going to be a bit of a long shot given the people that he targeted and the breadth of his killing and the like. So we're hopeful, but in the same sense, we actually have a general understanding of the type of victims we're looking for, and they're by very nature are very, very difficult ones. But I'll tell you what, a sister, a stepsister, you know, all those different types of relations, a cousin, people like that who might just remember vaguely that one cousin that that vanished in the 70s, that would be help to us, a huge help. And so it's frankly through coverage of all the different times we close out other cases that it's almost like clockwork. After that occurs, the next few days, Jason's phone starts ringing off the hook again. And that's all good. That's what we want. We want more and more of that to come in, because it really is. These, the 7 we got left, I guarantee each one of those, if we close them out, we're all going to sit there and think, what a long shot that one was. But it was someone who took that sort of leap and said, what's the harm? It takes seconds to have DNA swabbed. What is the harm?
So you're still taking in DNA from anyone who
Yes,
may come forward?
we are.
saying-
We're still doing it. Jason actively is still investigating numerous leads that come in. We do the same type of siphoning process when they come in. We first see if they fit the profile of a Gacy victim and if it happened during that time frame and all that, and then we go on to the next step. But even if it doesn't fit that profile, we still work on those cases to try to bring closure, because one of the things that we found out, unfortunately, in the course of this is that the way missing persons were handled, even frankly up until recently, is atrocious. You want to talk about people that no one in the system cared about, and that's why when Willow was commenting particularly about the thoughtfulness and professionalism of the way Andy's body was treated in San Francisco, that is not what the norm has been. Missing persons, unidentified people aren't given the dignity they should. We had found that out, and it's really mind-numbing to us at this day and age that missing persons are still in this world that people don't care too much about.
How many samples have you gotten in, estimated?
Oh God, how many?
I think it's 53, 54.
Yeah, in the 50s, 53, 54 as far as DNA samples.
And were you expecting this when you started this in 2011? Were you
No.
expecting to close out cases?
To be honest with you, we weren't. I mean, we sort of thought that there might be a couple cases here or there, I guess, but it was really far off on that. We honestly were focused almost exclusively on the Gacy victims and hadn't thought about all this. And then, frankly, as these cases have been coming forward, Each one of them has presented a scenario where you couldn't imagine that this would be closed out via this, but it's occurred. I mean, whether it's the Noe boy that we found he was found on the side of a mountain in Utah. I mean, who could have ever thought that would have been closed out based on a DNA sample given from a family in Washington, Illinois that came forward? I mean, my God. Anybody else?
Will, just very quickly, obviously your brother died under some terrible circumstances as well. Tell us about your thoughts about that and the fact that actually he wasn't a Gacy victim. Are you relieved at all that he wasn't a Gacy victim, as it turns out?
There's really no measuring stick of when violation is violation, or when tragedy is tragedy, or someone's only a little bit hurting this way or that way. I guess the quick answer, oh golly, I'm not sure what the answer to that is. It's not, somebody killed him, somebody hurt him grievously, and I hope that one, or whoever it is brought to justice.
Ma'am, when was the last time you saw your brother?
I was about 13 or 14. I didn't memorize exactly when it was because I did not know that it was going to be the last time I'd see him.
Thank you, everybody. Thank you.
You just have a pronouncer on your last name.
Wertheimer.
Wertheimer.
Mm-hmm.